Everybody, I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving vacation. And this morning we're going to talk a little bit more about the regional and local planning requirements and process under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. I know there's been a fair amount of briefing and activity already going on in McHenry County through Jeff and some of your meetings with him. And that there's action really starting in December. So today we're just going to kind of do an overview. Oh, I do not know what's going on. An overview of the planning requirements, a discussion of the planning process, the activities and the timelines, and what's going on in relationship to the coordination between the state plan, the regional plan, and the local plan. And then some of the detail in terms of what you might be able to move forward on in relationship to local planning for operations in McHenry County. I was talking to Leo before the webinar started. There's a fair amount of kind of sitting on the fence in this planning process because of the alignment requirement between the state plan, the regional plan, and the local plan. But there's also operation components for each of the local plans that I think, Jeff and I were talking about it last week, that I think really can, you can be making progress if you haven't started already, or you can expand the list of activities you can be working on given some of the state issuances of at least draft documentation. So these are our three discussion topics. Just a quick highlight here. I feel like one of the biggest changes between WIA and WIOA in relationship to the board role is really what I'm calling kind of a research and development function. I think there's a lot more, just when you look at the content requirements for the regional plan and the local plan, there's a lot more requirement for, assessment of your evidence, assessment of how well you're already doing, more reliance on better and more current regional and local economic data. So it really feels like one of the things that's going to be expanding out of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act is a growing role for boards to be much more actively and dynamically involved in research and development, and much more actively and dynamically involved in assessment and evaluation. This is just kind of a highlight. So in addition to the local plan, WIOA brought a regional plan. Sector strategies and career pathways are the two features of the strategic planning requirements. And then there's this whole kind of R&D around access and maximizing technology and really expanding your resources to get a better return on your investment. And I think those are kind of the highlights of the new planning functions for the local boards. So we talked briefly about this graphic in our board meeting, I think it was about 6 weeks ago now, that the coordination, the pace of the planning process, given the deadlines that pre-existed in the law, is challenging, to say the least. So the new requirement is that states have to submit a unified plan that covers all core programs. I'm assuming Illinois is doing a unified plan, although if you do a comprehensive plan, you actually write a plan for additional programs. Jeff, do you know if your state's doing a unified plan or a comprehensive plan? I know they're doing one or the other. I think it's unified last I heard. Anyway, the governor's vision and key strategies go into the state planning process and are intended to inform the regional planning process. And then the regional planning process is intended to inform the local area planning process and plan and actual plan documents. I know that you have some a regional planning event coming up, but I think this is where between now and maybe even at December, I think one of the main questions is what does McHenry County and your board see as a regional opportunity, and how do you take those regional opportunities and make sure they're also benefit your county. So I think that's probably one of the ongoing kind of questions and dynamics I would ask that you guys keep in mind as you go through this. So, for example, I'm assuming sector strategy development is already in your region a regional activity, but how is it that all of the individual boards make sure that any sector strategy work that's done at a regional level benefits the local area? And I'm hoping that you have that kind of process and kind of guiding principles discussion in your December meeting, so that what you're putting into the regional planning, you are assured will benefit your local plan and your local area as well. And then there's a requirement for local area workforce planning. I think what's most distinct at the local level is really this operational section. I see, Jeff, you've called it the local program and operations plan. I think most of the strategies and the strategic proportions of the plan will be regionally addressed. And then at the local level, what will be most unique in your local plan will really be operational details. So the coordination issue between the regional and local plans, that's probably a second item I would put on the agenda for your meeting in December, is really not only how will we assure all the regional strategies benefit each of the individual boards and counties in the region, but what is the coordination requirement between the local and regional plans, especially given the timeline you're on. If the regional plans aren't done until March and you still then have to build a local plan, you're going to get squeezed into a box. So I would make sure they're addressing that in the meeting. So I think you've seen this before. I know I got this from one of the PowerPoints that Jeff has used for the board, but I just wanted to re-highlight some of the activities so people can, based on your role and your interest, be available. So December 11th, there's a regional planning meeting. The following week, there's a task force on clusters. And then early in January, there's a statewide planning meeting summit. So, Jeff, can you, I guess I want to have, and maybe they already are, but be clear about sort of who goes to each of these meetings and what do you know, if anything, at this point about the agenda. So can you give us a little bit more detail on the December 11th meeting?
The December 11th meeting, Julie and I will be attending, and community college people will be attending. So it's kind of like the local board staff and program directors. Businesses are invited, but because of logistics and without an agenda, it's hard to know who to invite or what to suggest. So there is no agenda yet.
Okay.
And we'll just be bringing that back. Hopefully we'll be able to use some of that as the talking points for the 12-16 meeting we're going to have locally with our planning group for the board.
Okay.
Is your PowerPoint supposed to be advancing?
Yes. You're not on slide 5?
No.
It says waiting to view mounting on your screen.
Yeah, it says waiting to view your screen.
Oh, well, that's not.
There we go. Now I see you.
Are we in slide 5 together now?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. I'm sorry. For some reason, my control panel keeps popping in and out, so I'm not quite sure.
It's a Mac, right?
Yes. Well, it's worked every other meeting. Let's do that. Well, I hope they do give you an agenda. And actually, meanwhile, I think through this conversation, what I was thinking about in relationship to this webinar is, maybe your board and you and Julie and some of the other key players there, Doug and Pam, you could create a list of agenda items you want addressed regionally, and therefore you're hoping, they're on the agenda for this December meeting, and if not, then have a plan to follow up, right? So you have an idea that you might get a little bit more specific productivity for yourselves out of it than going to a meeting that I'm surprised there's no agenda yet, but that you don't really know.
Well, if there is, they're just not sharing it. And since that is all, because it's there's 3 meetings statewide.
Right.
And this is the 3rd and final meeting of those 3, but it encompasses all of northeastern Illinois, from Rockford on down to, Kankakee and everything. So, it's a big area it's covering.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can get some intel from colleagues that were at one of the first 2.
That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah. And so, do you know anything about the task force meeting on December 4th, the week of December 14th? Is there any more detail on that?
Well, that's our it is scheduled for 12/16 here at the Working Center, and and really hopefully we'll be able to bring back. Well, we kind of know what the industry sectors are and work with the community college and our training providers on the pathways. But, which of the sectors are we going to target the hardest here,
Right. So you'll take the kind of the regional list and drill down.
Yeah.
So that's with your the planning committee from your board, that the December 16th meeting.
Yes.
Got it. And then there's a statewide planning summit in January. I think I'm guessing the term statewide means everybody's invited, as opposed to they're going to start talking about the state plan in January. Is that
what I envision that January meeting to be, the to be determined meeting, is probably a recap of the December regional meetings, those 3 meetings I addressed, ours being on the 11th, and then what the results of those meetings were. So, it's a little hard to dig into the regional plan, because there's 22 local areas, and I know the state's not going to just let everybody do theirs the way they want to do it. So we're going to have to be waiting for a template to come from the state.
Right. Right. Okay, so well, I feel like these are going from kind of yellow light to green lights in relationship to the planning, and that my sense is you're doing as much as you can at the local level, given all of the coordination you have to do with the regional and the state plan. And then you and I, Jeff, will continue to talk about there are probably components of the local plan that you can work on, and as you saw, if you briefed through the PowerPoint, I've highlighted some of those at the end. And those include sort of the local MOUs and your infrastructure cost agreements. They're due in March. There has been state-level documentation on them from joint committees across multiple agencies. So I think that's something that the local partners, especially the core program partners, can be working on, but it will apply to all of the required one-stop partners. And also in March, then, the plan is that your draft regional plan, which incorporates all the local plans in your region, is available for comment and gets submitted 30 days later in April. Also in April, the state has got a plan for the Career Center assessment and certification, and there's draft documentation out from your state on center certification. And then new plans take effect in July. So it really is a fast track. I think, and I'll just share, so Jeff and I talked about, I think there's a lot of opportunity in this planning process to use that document to say, when it's true we do not know what we are doing on this required element, that the plan says our plan is to regionally get some assessment and some data, study the issue, and then amend the plan when that specific item is due, rather than just, create some kind of, meaningless verbiage. And I think that's the approach that multiple states and regions and local areas are definitely taking. So one of the things that I think helps the discussion in terms of what you can be working on now is that the state plan, the regional plan, and the local plans, they're all talked about with 2 specific sections. There's a strategic plan component embedded in the document, and then there's an operational plan component embedded in the document. So the state's unified plan will have a strategic and operational section. Your regional plan and your local plan will also have strategic and operational section. And this is my early reference. I think the strategic planning, my sense is, especially on the movement around the state, is that the state and regional documents, those plans are going to be heavy on the strategy, analysis of the economic and workforce factors, assessment of what we're currently doing in terms of workforce development activities and their strengths and weaknesses, really the goals and the vision and kind of the objectives, the key objectives for this planning period, for what we have to do to meet the needs of the workforce and employers. I think that those components will lie within the state plan and the regional plan, and they'll inform something that is going to mostly be local, which is this operational plan. So this is really how are we implementing the strategies is very much, there will be some regional components, but it's also very much a local document. So how will we, each of the core program partners in our area, how will we do our alignment, how we will operate our local one-stop system, what policies will we develop and share. And I saw already, Jeff, I didn't know if that was your terminology, if it's coming out of the state. You already used sort of the term local program plan. Is that your sense as well?
That was what I called it.
Yeah.
In talking with the state, the local program plan, the tactical plan, the delivery plan is just how we're going to implement the regional needs, address the regional needs locally.
Right. Right. And then I think what's most unique to the local plan is operational. I think you might have some unique local strategies, but then most of the strategies your local board adopts will be embedded in the regional. Is that your sense as well? And others, Doug, Pam, does anybody have a sense for that?
Yes.
Yes.
That's what we've been told.
At least that's our understanding of all.
Okay. Okay.
This is Julie. We've been told by the state that we will not be doing two different plans. Our local part of it is just going to be the tactical and operationals on how are we going to implement the regional plan.
Okay, so they're actually confirming what I've sort of been recommending to folks at this level, which is the strategy will be embedded in the state and regional plans, and that really all the local component will just be implementation. And that's what I think you just said. Perfect.
Yeah,
well,
the locals are going to have to discuss what the region needs are. So the locals will really be developing the regional plan, and then each of us will bring the regional plan back and how we're going to address it locally.
Right. Right. So, and then to that extent, I think the local document has some alignment to strategy components in it, and then it has a collection of other really truly operational and administrative components that we can be working on now as this rollout of the strategic component of the regional plan moves forward, or hopefully advances in December. So the regional planning process, now we can talk about it as the strategic document or the strategic component of your regional and local plan. And again, I guess I'm hoping then that this December meeting helps Jeff, you and Julie and anybody else there really get clear about what is regional, your agreement on what is regional, and with an agreement on what is better approached regionally, not just the required list of what has to be in the regional plan, but how then you'll also ensure that each of the components of the regional plan specifically benefit your county and the economy and the workforce in McHenry County. So here's what the legislation and the regulations say about the regional plan. It really is saying that, so here's the initial requirement is that a single regional plan goes in, and the regional plan is incorporating all of the local plans. So they've drawn that out more specifically in Illinois to say the regional plan will pretty much be the strategic components, and the local plan will be the implementation components for that regional plan. So what already is kind of a regional requirement are the service delivery strategies, specifically the sector strategies and the career pathway strategies. I think everybody would have agreed anyway that they are best approached regionally, and then, you know, you have to make sure they're applicable to a local area and that they benefit your local area. Coordination with regional economic development service and providers. Again, it's based on my knowledge of the Metro Chicago region, you're already doing a fair amount of this strategic stuff at a regional level. So some of this will just be fine-tuning and making sure, you know, crossing your T's and dotting your I's in relationship to the plan component requirements. But I think the group already pre-exists, that you're working together, your cooperation and coordination already exists. So it feels like sort of a 2.0. What else and what next can we be doing as a region? Coordination of transportation and other supportive services. I think I think that will come up, but I think you've already done that. And I think your region is so populous and pretty well covers a pretty good geographic area that you may not find a lot of other individual services that can best be coordinated regionally. That's not true in other regions, but that might be true for you. And at least on this bullet, they say as appropriate. So they're giving you that opportunity. I think the big one that I'm hoping they have on the agenda, so my third big issue for a regional planning meeting, is how are we going to, so this next bullet here is brand new, and the way it's written in both the law and the regulation, and then the documentation that's been coming out after the regulation, still leaves a lot of questions in play in terms of regionally negotiating performance measures that apply to local areas, because in other sections of the law and the regulation, they also say local performance measures negotiated by the local board. So I'm hoping that you find out, and if this is not on the December 11th agenda, I think you guys got to really push for some kind of the state level discussion and documentation on what this really means and how it applies, because regional performance measures are brand new, and they're good for some counties and not so good for others when you go to regional approach. Have you heard any discussion on this yet, Jeff or Julie?
No, we haven't, but we are having our meeting for the IWP meeting where DCO will be there on Thursday, and I'm definitely...
Oh. And we did, at our last IWP meeting, we did bring up that concern to the local representative from DOL.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, this one is, it's tricky. I wish I had a template for you, and I haven't seen anything come out of any other state yet that gives me a clear picture about what it means to regionally negotiate, essentially, local performance measures. So I'll keep my eyes open, and if I find something that starts to look like a good template, I'll definitely give it to you. But I think I'm hoping your December meeting really specifically addresses it. It has to be in the regional plan, how you will do it, and then what your specific local area has been assigned out of a regional measure goes in the local component. So not a lot of time left to figure this one out. I do think there's some opportunity on the second to last bullet, the administrative costs arrangements, including the pooling of funds for administrative costs as appropriate. And again, you already have an established regional organization, the workforce boards of the metropolitan Chicago area that I know Jan has been working for. I think there are some new requirements in WIOA that you might want to make sure are funded and produced regionally. And for an example, there's a huge increase in the amount of research and evaluation that you're going to be required to do under WIOA, including required third-party activities. And some of these don't kick in until 17 or 18, but I think you'll want to have a discussion at your regional planning meeting about what this list of administrative costs might be that you pool. And for me, the research, the development, the labor market and analysis and analytics, the evaluation of promising practices. I mean, everywhere throughout this piece of legislation and in the regulation, they use the term promising practices. Well, there's no set standard for identifying promising practices. I mean, what does it mean? And how do we know it's promising? And so there's a whole bunch of, I think, research, development, and evaluation activities that I would add to a list of pooled funds and do it at a regional level. But again, well, I guess you'll have to see if people are talking about that yet, because some of that stuff doesn't kick in until 17 or 18. And the governor can add additional requirements. So if that's happening, I hope you find out sooner than later, because it's already a pretty good list.
As far as I'm concerned right now, Melanie, our plan is we're planning to plan.
Yeah, you and I were talking about that. You said that last week when we talked. I think that's a good approach.
I mean, we can only do what we can do with the guidance we have right now, and we just keep plugging forward.
Right, right. Well, and I think a lot of the new requirements are figure out how to do the new requirements is the plan, right? I mean, when we're required to do career pathways, the plan says we're going to collect the right partners, we're going to identify the right pathways in some sequential order, we're going to use existing resources to build our pathways, and we're going to identify which pathways are key to the region and to the local areas. Boom. You know, that section's written. You've seen this before.
Melanie, too, the other part, too, is that we were told by DOL that January date for the final regs is not going to happen. So it will be sometime in the spring.
And they didn't identify what year.
But you know, that's a frustrating thing as well, is because here you are starting to put these plans in, and you don't even know what the final regs are going to be. I mean, they're pretty much going to be what's going to proposed, but you know, you're going to go through all this work and they're going to have to change things, I'm sure. So that's, I think, the state's attitude is it's a plan.
Right.
It's just a plan, and if your plan is that we're identifying these things and we're going to put them in the plan to continue on, you're obviously going to have to change your plan once you have the answer, but I don't think they're looking at us to have all the answers right now. At least that's what I'm feeling from the state.
And even though it's a 4-year plan with a 2-year review window, that review window is going to be much shorter because we don't have the guidance.
Right. Right. And or the cycle will change. When you actually have a plan based on regulation and requirement coming out of the Secretaries of Labor and Education, you know, the 2-year window is, it's as if 2016 is the starting point, and I'm agreeing with both of you. I don't think it is. I really don't think it is. So we'll see. We'll see. So you both just mentioned it's a 4-year plan with a 2-year review process. And I had heard that the final regs aren't going to be out in January. And I think just a couple of specific items for me that I think we can put on a wait and see list and don't have to take any action on is definitely the whole performance measurement issue, because that is one of the trickiest parts of the legislation. That is one of the trickiest, that is the one sections in the regulations that said we want comments on and almost absolutely every bullet. And the performance is a key part of both the regional and local plans. So I think that until they figure that out, they're not going to have final regulations. And that is the piece that I think is causing the biggest delays right now. That said, you folks have been around long enough to know what kind of strategy and continuous improvement will help your performance before you even negotiate a level or a numeric value for that performance. And that's the kind of thing you want to keep working on, and you would have anyway. So again, I guess I'm listing in this local plan the elements on slide 9 and 10, kind of the expanded requirements for the local plan, I'm thinking a fair number of these are regional activities while they come under the heading requirements of the local plan. So, hopefully, again, as soon as possible, if not in December, the contents of the regional plan are clear. And what will be planned for regionally has a pretty good table of contents so that the local document, I'm thinking the smallish, the short, quote, in quotes, the short local document, you can proceed on it while the regional items are happening. So analysis of the workforce development activities in the region, it already says that, even though it's listed under the local plan. I think this is a regional element. I think it goes in the regional plan. I don't think it's repeated in the local component. Assessment of evidence of effectiveness. I love this one. How do you know? This bullet really says your plan has to tell us how you know that your activities are effective and that your promising practices are quote unquote promising. I think that's a regional activity. I think that's one where you pool funds to say we want third-party evaluators helping us determine this. What evidence do we need and how do we apply it to not only our current operations but any of our new sector strategies or career pathways? We're going to want evaluation included in the planning process. Therefore, I think it's regional. Alignment for post-secondary credentials. There's two issues here. One is we need a system for increasing the number of industry-recognized credentials that are available, not just post-secondary, but industry-recognized, because that term is pretty consistent throughout. So we need a process for increasing the number of credentials, and I definitely think that's state and regional, but it's certainly probably a state-level activity. And then the second issue is increasing the number of individuals who receive them, and I think that goes in the local implementation plan section. So again, I'm just kind of going through this, trying to, in my mind, I almost wrote words next to them. Make sure this is in the regional plan, regional, local, or just local, so I can start separating the work that's regional and the work that's truly local. Pathways, so in this next bullet, here's my perfect example. On this next bullet, I think career pathways are state and regional. I think co-enrollment is local. I think co-enrollment agreements are with your specific program partners in relationship to the services and the activities are available locally. So I think career pathways is a component of the regional plan. I think co-enrollment is it's a tactic. It goes into the local implementation. And this, for example, is one I think locals can start working on, is how are we going to increase co-enrollment as a return on investment strategy, as a sequencing and coordinating services, because most customers need multiple services strategy. So local levels of performance, this one I just have a question mark. I'm not sure how a regional negotiation has another bullet here that says the local performance negotiation, but that's a big wait and see. This one's brand new. I think this is local, although you could have a regional template. How are other workforce boards in your area planning to evaluate the fiscal agent? And you could probably come up with a template process and agreement at the regional level and just apply it locally. There's a mix for me on delivery of services. I think this is really a key local component. How are you going to deliver services through your local one-stop service delivery system? How are you going to continuously improve them? How are you going to evaluate and promote promising practices? I think this is kind of key to, this one here is kind of key to the local implementation plan.
That's the memorandum of understanding is actually it.
Right. I think the once you know what it is, that the MOU definitely documents it. Let me see. Let me just check my time here. 9:06. Yeah. So the next 1, 2, 3, 4, probably 5 bullets are really local. Even if you got a template or you talked about it regionally and people shared ideas about how they're doing this. I think the next several bullets here are local. Let me just get my pen. So this, and the reason I'm stopping to point that out is because as you and I talked last week, Jeff, I think there are local activities that you can be pursuing while the strategic or macro level planning processes at the state and region unfold. So for me, just wanted to spend a good amount of time kind of separating out the regional list from the local list. Would you agree? Any comment on this list now? Let me just check in with folks on what they're thinking about.
No, I know that we've already been convening some of the local partners to talk about the program and service delivery at the one stop and hitting them with our budget numbers so that they know kind of what we spend in terms of what their contribution administratively and infrastructure. So, yeah, we've been having the MOU discussion. So,
excellent. Other questions or comments? Let me just get my attendee list out here. Well, I know Leo, Doug, Pam. Any other comments here?
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
It's Doug Martin. About a few months ago, I attended one of the sessions they had with the Illinois Community College Workforce Board and how they were trying to integrate all those community college around the state with economic development planning, and I didn't know if this had any relationship to that in terms of career pathways and stuff like that.
Jeff, do you have a sense? I would assume that was the purpose of that kind of meeting, but I wasn't party to it. Jeff, do you know?
Well, yes, because we rely a little bit on economic development to tell us who's coming in and going out so that we can communicate with our educators about what's happening locally and as slow as it may be, but we try to align the training programs to meet the needs of the employers. Well, yeah, and the community college is a big part of the local plan. Doug, was that meeting at Harper?
No, they had it broken down by like regions, but the one for our region was at Moraine Valley Community College, so it was pretty far.
Okay, that was the ICCB, the Illinois Community College Board Strategic Plan meeting.
Right, and they were trying to kind of align, sort of juxtapose with the community college and economic development and what the community college's role and how they could work on career pathways with local economic development agencies. I'm not sure a lot of people attended from the area because, like I said, the one for our region was in Palos Hills.
Yeah, and that's where the meeting next week on the 11th is going to be.
From 10 to 5.
From 10 to 5 on a Friday, Doug.
Oh, so you have probably save some time for traffic on the way back.
Yeah.
We'll see you Saturday.
But that was I thought it was a very valuable meeting. I mean, there was a lot of economic development people from all around the region and trying to work with the community college presidents and all the workforce boards at the community college level throughout the state had these meetings.
Excellent. Well, in my sense, for around the country, that community colleges are so most of the, again using air quotes, career pathways work up until kind of the last 5 to 10 years was essentially programs of study. It was a very academic activity where they would align a series of curriculum and courseware to create a program of study that they could determine led to the right kind of skills and training for specific occupations. And they were large scale. They were, itemized occupations. They were kind of at an industry level. And then the next generation of community college strategic planning has been to take that career pathway work out of just a programs of study arena and turn it into a workforce development process as well. So combining a program study with work experience in the dynamic of the current economy. So it's an evolution. Hopefully, it sounds a little bit like that's where that your community college system is going, and that's generally the trend for community college systems nationwide. Is they're making that next step.
And I think that was very important. That came out of that meeting. Exactly what you said. It was the aligning the needs of the up and coming workforce at the level beyond community college, more on the soft skills and stuff like that, not just hardcore career planning. So I think that was that meeting addressed those issues, and a lot of it probably is pertinent to this in a lot of ways.
Right. Well, yeah, you need all, three legs on this stool to be aligned. So it sounds like, and I think this is bringing in the workforce development piece, again, to a process that's already been underway. I say this frequently. I think the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act just codified what both the Federal Department of Labor and the Federal Department of Education had been funding over time and studying through third-party evaluation. So what's working, meaning already in play in lots of areas around the country, is now kind of in the legislation. There's some areas where, they've been doing a lot of all of this, sector strategies and career pathways and, infrastructure costs were already shared and et cetera, et cetera. So I think the progress, I think people were on this path, and now we're just making sure, even with our planning documents, that we're articulating that and that we're making sure, again, I think with the regional plan that I think the big issue is to make sure that each local area in a region significantly benefits from the regional plan, and the regional plan doesn't sit as some separate, independent activity that doesn't really benefit McHenry County. I think that's my main issue when I've been talking about these regional planning processes, is how you make sure your voice says, okay, if you pick those three sectors, how does that help us? If one of those sectors apply to us, that's the one we'll focus on. We're good to go. If none of the three sectors in a regional plan apply to your county, then they got to keep working on it. You know what I mean? And you guys have a very active regional group already in terms of workforce development. Okay, so the workforce area plan elements, again, I think what I just really wanted to highlight here, I think I'll make this kind of my summary, is I think there is a significant section of really the local plan that both your core program partners and your one-stop required partners can be working on. And I think under WIA, a fair amount of the local plan really only applied to the adult dislocated worker and youth programs, but the new local plan has to apply to all of the core program partners. So while your existing local plan has got a lot of template copy for some of this, I think what we have to do now is say, youth activities across adult education, the youth program, the vocational rehabilitation, and all these other program partners, that you make sure you don't see this as just the youth program for the board. You see this really as how are we creating a community-wide strategy around service and activities to youth. So that was the first kind of stretch that these local plans have to make. But I think these sections in particular are probably already drafted in your current local plan, and that uses to use that as a template, and then add to it the requirement that, let me just show you, I think, let me escape out of this. So I know Jeff you already did this. I just want to remind people you already did this slideshow. So Jeff's already got a document out that goes through each of the 13 elements in the local plan, the detail underneath. And I just wanted to start, for example, on not number one, number two. So item number three in the local plan is a description of how you'll expand access to programs and services. And they're not talking just about adult dislocated worker and youth. They're talking about employment services, training services, education services, supportive services. So there's a fair amount of planning, discussion, and agreements that aren't even quite the same as an MOU or content in an MOU that I think you can be working on. Play from current slide. That are one of these 22 elements. And you probably already are. I think, Jeff, not only have you said you've got the activities going on, but the activities are starting to lead to, I think, copying your local plan. And then I just built, again, I know you're working on a lot of this, especially with the first three, but I just built a list of, I think, the implementation element that even without the strategic components clearly laid out either in the regional plan or itemized in your local plan, that you can be working on simultaneously through your local core program partners and your required one-stop partners. And Jeff, you've already told me you're already working on the infrastructure funding agreement. And my sense is, based on other areas that I've worked on, is there's a lot of angst. I mean, most programs don't have any money. Most programs are understaffed. Most programs have staff vacancies. So when we start talking about funding a one-stop career center, and part of that funding might be, sending staff to the center, I've seen a lot of high anxiety and high stress in the meetings. I don't know how they're going there. But I think this first year, you probably already are very flexible, but I think there's got to be a lot of flexibility, as in leading to a pretty solid funding agreement. But we're seeing really, this is our 1.0 agreement, and then we'll have a 2.0 agreement, and then we'll have a 3.0 agreement, and we'll eventually get to a point where we feel like the system, this one-stop system in McHenry County, is equally shared in terms of cost and resources over time. It would be really hard to get.
This is Julie, and the big problem with that is we can put it all on paper, but our partners don't pay. They don't pay now. State hasn't paid their rent in 6 months. There's other areas that they have not paid for over a year. So, I mean, it's all great on paper, but there's no teeth for us to collect any of the money. So, in reality, all it's going to come out of Title I again, because there's no teeth in it.
I like it that WIOA gives the board a lot of responsibility, but they don't give the board any authority to enact or follow through on things. All I can do is keep calling and asking, and
right.
So
basically, I think that part is going to be easy because it's all just going to be on paper, and there's no way for you to ever collect any of the funds.
It has to come from the top down.
Well, I do think. I mean, surprisingly, there's a Jeff, you and I talked about this document. So where's number? I should have numbered them. So career services is kind of an interesting new twist in this legislation, and not only your state got clear. I think everybody got clear pretty quickly. You're not just sharing the infrastructure cost. You're sharing the cost of the delivery of career services. So even if you don't initially make any progress here, they know they owe us rent, they're not paying. That's existed for X amount of time. I think there's another conversation here that says you can help pay for the delivery of services via on-site staff. And one of the state level supports for you guys on this is that document that came out. I think it's under the draft MOU or whatever, but it's a document that lists all the career services along the left-hand border, and then across the top, each of the, or many of the one-stop partners are listed, And it says clearly, this is a state level, a joint committee of state level leaders that says that, you know, adult education services will be on site at the center, and therefore they will be helping to deliver career services. So, you know, maybe given your experience with the infrastructure piece of this ongoing negotiation, maybe you look to career services and you see if you can't create any inroads there, and just in relationship to more presence of other partners helping deliver these career services at the center. That opportunity there, Julie, or not really, or don't know yet?
We're already starting to talk about that to see how, you know, most of Title I staff does the workshops and things like that, and I've already reached out to say, okay, what can some of our partners do?
Exactly.
Workshops and things like that. So hopefully that'll be a way to get some of that done where it doesn't rely all on just the Title I staff.
And you are correct. The infrastructure cost is more hard dollar sharing.
Yeah.
Where the center operations is more in kind.
Right. And I think there's a lot of room for progress for more in kind, and the in kind to be more tangible. You know, not something just on paper. And I think out of that in kind partner building, then you continue to work on infrastructure funding. The second thing that I think does help, and again, I know, Julie, you're just like a lot of my other clients around the country who had it figured out. It just never meant anything. I think there is state level involvement now in acknowledging this joint team who put together the list of costs that go on an infrastructure. We're across all of these your major, you know, 4 players at this level. I think you should probably, maybe even through IWP, you should raise the question of teeth. So, you know, what happens when you have an infrastructure funding agreement and multiple individual partners fail to do what they agreed to do? I think I would bump that one up pretty quickly, because you've had an agreement all along and it's not working.
It's the state. I'm also on the state workforce board as the IWP president. It has been brought up not only by myself but other partners. At that meeting, it's been brought up locally as well. The IWP, especially when they give us the draft regs, and we keep saying, what's our recourse if nobody pays? And so far, I have not seen an answer from anybody. Just a lot of shaking his head. So.
Right.
I think the governor's 3% fund should be available for us if somebody doesn't pay. Because you have to have the set aside if you can't reach local negotiations, and that was my suggestion. And it said we should be able to go and tap that fund if the local people don't pay.
Right.
But well, you know how far I'll get, but it wasn't suggested.
Yeah. Well, and I think just, you know, one more on this, and then I'll make sure we see if there's any other questions before we close up here. I think, well, the governor has to build a formula for the infrastructure funding in the case that you don't have a local agreement. And I think based on both your IWP representation, Julie, and your representation on the state board, is you want to make sure that doesn't inadvertently look like a better deal for any of the local partners, because I was already in a meeting in Illinois where a local partner from adult education said, well, I've heard the state's going to say it's, you know, 3% of the state fund. Well, I'd rather have the state pay for it and not have to pay anything locally. And I thought, well, that's not a good idea for the local partners trying to reach agreement on infrastructure funding if it looks like that has consequences not intended. So I just kind of recommend you keep your eye on that, because and if that's true across all these partners, then as a local board, I would say let's just adopt the governor's plan, because it'll be more meaningful. What we tried locally didn't work. So, you know, maybe that's not well, we're going to do this to you if you can't figure it out. Maybe you strategically decide it will be better to use the state formula because it's got state teeth, right? I don't know. I'm not sure what the numbers look like on either of them, but so MOU and center, the first three have pretty good state documentation. Sounds like you're already working on them. I do think your center certification is at risk if your infrastructure funding agreements don't get well executed. So again, there might be some local teeth there.
And we have a small board task force to look at the one-stop center certification requirements that the governor is recommending now.
Right, and maybe what needs to be done there. And then I do think I think at our partner meeting we had some pretty good discussions around career services and customer flow, and I think those spill out into co-enrollment. Business service strategies are required, and they're required to be aligned across the 4 core program partners. So that's another area that I think you can wade into. I know there's been lots of stops and starts on that all over the country. People get an agreement and then it doesn't really hold. Priority services, linkages to the unemployment population. I mean, this is just a list of things I think that are required planning components, but they're operational in nature that I know you're already working on some of them, so I just kind of made this list as full as I could so that you can feel like you're not waiting on everything, and you guys wouldn't anyway. I know you're already working on some of those. All right, I think that's the bulk of the presentation. Are there any comments, questions? So I had kind of a list of I'm hoping you get out of your regional meeting, and if not, I hope someone figures them out pretty quickly, and that's definitely the performance negotiating. You know, I think that's probably the main one. How will that happen? Because that seems to me like one of the trickiest pieces of the regional process, and one of the brand new pieces in the regional process. All right, questions, comments, concerns, clarifications, anything from anybody?
None from me.
Can I not?
12:16, what time?
8 o'clock. Okay. Yeah, I believe that our 12:16 meeting that we're having here is scheduled for 8 o'clock in the morning, so we can get everybody in and out before they get distracted by work.
Excellent. Well, and yeah, I mean, I wish they had an agenda for that meeting, but you know, I can see if you can't get your intel from the first 2 meetings just to have an idea about potential outcomes from that meeting. I mean, it may feel like it's not even a starting point, and they're still talking about it. You know what I mean? If that meeting is really just outlining a process and you don't really get any work done, then I think you got to have a lot of follow-up stuff happen pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I haven't really set a big agenda for a 12/16 meeting yet because I was hoping to get a little guidance on it from the state. But what I'm expecting to do right now is to take some of those local plan elements and start defining them at that 12/16 meeting. Start
right.
Right.
Not if all else fails, but while we're in this, a little bit of a limbo, let's just keep making our own local progress.
Yeah, I can take your slide 11 or my PowerPoint on planning, and we can start putting some definition to some of those.
Right. Right. Well, and I do think your partners, you have already some success across your partners to build on. So it just feels like making some of that implementation, that local service delivery strategy progress move forward, it'll have more direct impact than, finally agreeing to strategies that will take a while to implement.
And it works. I sent you the link to the Wisconsin state plan. We could adopt
yes.
much of that. I mean, that's a simplistic document that we can adapt.
Right. Again, and move forward on as you. I mean, the feds put out a webinar on state planning, and they said if your state wants to submit its state plan before the final regulations and the information collection requirement document is done, here's how to do it. So clearly it's happening. And, I think the burden is on the feds to move it, get along a little bit quicker, and not cause a lot of redo work. And then I forgot to mention, I'm just going to put it out here. The other thing that I sometimes forget, but I think is worthwhile, is just to keep that list of waivers ready, so that if you guys want to do something and you go ahead and move forward and it's not quite in compliance with something that comes out of final regulations from the Fed, I think your first approach should be a waiver and not all right, well, let's amend our plan and go back and do what they told us to do. If you've already had a solid, planning process that says this is right for McHenry County, I think if you get ahead of the planning process, the first fallback I would strongly recommend is a waiver. Just say, okay, we've already decided this is the best way to do it. We're not backtracking and doing it some way that someone else told us to do. It's not going to be very, very productive for us. So, okay. No other questions? I guess we're going to call it a day, yes?
Yes. And when you send that PowerPoint out, or, the recording, Carrie will get the link out to everybody.
Perfect. And I'll check with her. I think we may still have a problem on one of them, but I'll take care of that today.
Yeah, the first one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm just going to have to redo it, Carrie, and send a new link. I can't tell what happened.
Okay.
I'll do both of those. I'll do both of those today.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
And I
Thank
do
you,
want
guys.
everybody that joined us this morning. And thank you, Melanie. And
Thank
we'll be meeting again next Tuesday morning.
Yeah, next Tuesday I think we're talking about boards and board roles. So I'll call you, Jeff, and we'll have a kind of a pre-discussion on that.
All right. Real good.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.